And we're going to go to, I believe, San Diego, California, and we've got Konnan on the line. Konnan, how you doing?
Hey, what's up, man?
Not too much. What's going on?
Not much. I'm back again without the controversial Raven to get me more hot water.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So, what's your thoughts about everything that's going on? Before we go on, is there anything new as far as Juventud Guerrera surgery or anything like that?
No, he actually wasn't on the show yesterday because if you remember that beautiful incident in College Town or whatever it's called, State College, whatever, over there in Penn State, when he got a DUI and ran away from the cops. At least that's what the cops say. Hoovy says that he was trying to pull over and he couldn't find where to pull over, and so the cop took that as he was evading justice. Anyways, he's in court, right? He was in court yesterday. And supposedly on his elbow, he was going to get a check today. And if it didn't have the range of motion that the doctors were hoping for, he'd get surgery and he'd be out probably about 4 weeks. But, you know, evidently they like his commentating, which I think is hilarious, and they may bring him on for some more of that. Hello?
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, what did you watch Raw last night?
Yeah, I saw Raw.
What'd you think of it?
I thought it was.
I'm trying to keep you out of trouble by not bringing up Nitro at all.
I thought it was pretty funny. I like Raw. It's a funny show. I've always, you know, I especially like the Too Much, Too Cold, whatever they're called.
Too Cool. I love those guys.
Yeah, I think they're hilarious. They're so cheesy and so campy. You gotta love them. And plus, I love Rakeem. Is that the guy that was working for me in AAA?
No, that's his brother. That's Nicozuna's brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
But because they both have the same, you know, big, large derriere. And I think that's hilarious when he starts doing those dance steps. You know, the Hardy Boys, as you can see, they're getting a tremendous push. It may be too quick. I don't think people believe in them yet. You know, I've always liked the New Age Outlaws. Hunter almost seems like, it almost seems people don't like Stephanie, you know, when they're calling her a slut and a whore, and, you know, because I think people look at it as like, how could you get so drunk that you didn't even realize what you were doing? You know what I'm saying? So I think people are turning against her.
Yeah, and I think that's not what they wanted, because I think that whole idea of the TV last night was to turn the people back with her, because nobody expected the thing Thursday where the crowd really turned on her. By the way, if you want to call us up, we've got some calls on the line, but if you want to call, you can call at 1-877-IATA00. That's 1-877-392-3200 for Konnan. We want to start with you and go back to your background and breaking in professional wrestling. Why don't you tell everyone, now, you grew up in Florida and L.A., basically, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Miami, and when I was 17, I got into a little bit of trouble. So I came down to San Diego. I joined the military. I was on the Navy boxing team in '83. You know, I won the California middleweight title. And I was going to become a professional boxer, you know. And I'd been already boxing amateur for about 11 years. Anyways, one thing led to another, and I dislocated my shoulder. I had to have my arm in a cast for like 6 months. Anyways, after rehabilitation and everything, I didn't have, my left hand wasn't the same. I couldn't throw stiff jabs. I couldn't throw uppercuts, hooks like I used to. Guys that I used to kind of, you know, have an easy time with were just destroying me. So I got out of boxing and kind of got a little bit into bodybuilding, and I lived in San Diego, which is on the border of Tijuana, Baja California, and a friend of mine, a guy that I just met, said, hey, why don't you get into wrestling in Mexico? He brought me across the border. I'd never seen Mexican wrestling in my life, so when I saw the mask and the capes and the dives and the blood, I went berserk, and I wanted to try it. And the next day I went to train.
And you trained with did you train in the same class with Psychosis and Damien? I mean, Halloween and Ray Jr. and all them?
Halloween, Damien, Ray Jr., Psychosis. They were all in our class. Rey Mysterio Sr., which is his uncle, was there. Super Astro, who some people might know, is also from Tijuana. He was there. And then anytime Negro Casas came into town, you know, he would train us too. And then after that, I went to Ciudad Juarez, which is on the border of El Paso, Texas, which is really where I became famous. Eddie Guerrero at that time was a local legend, but he was up in Mexico making a name for himself, and I went in there, and I was kind of like a overnight, you know, success. And then when Eddie came back, we had like 13 consecutive sellouts, which is still a record to this day, and that's where I got discovered, and I got brought up to Mexico City.
Now, that's interesting you bring up that thing. Now, Eddie was probably real early in his career, too, even though, like, the family was probably there forever.
Right, and because his father's basically. It's kind of funny because I believe one of the first American promotions was based out of El Paso, Texas. So I've been reading a lot of history on that, and so it was very easy to spill over to the border over into Juarez. So Juarez has a very long wrestling tradition, obviously with Gory and Hector and Chavo Mando, basically. You know what? If you look at there's this tape out somewhere. I think you saw it, Dave. I don't know, the one that says Konnan the Legend. Made by Rudos Entertainment. You'll see a very thin, very young Eddie from like 8 years ago. It's hilarious, you know, to see him so thin and so young looking. And we had some classic matches over there in Juarez. But what was the question?
No, we were just talking about I think that. It was just we were just making the point that was like early in his career, and that all of his brothers probably had already wrestled there. We were talking about something that just triggered something into my head, and I was actually writing about this a few weeks ago. Probably going back to I don't even know when, probably the 30s, 40s, certainly up through the 70s, there was like almost a pipeline between wrestlers in Mexico and in Texas and in some cases Southern California. And I know you're aware of it with Mil Mascaras, and before that with, Rito Romero and Jose Lothario and so many of the guys, Dory Dixon, and that were legends. So many of the legends of Mexican wrestling in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were well known to wrestling fans in California and Mexico. And then probably about the mid-70s, it was like this gap widened and like almost maybe late 70s actually, and like there became this thing where nobody in America knew anything about Mexican wrestling literally until you and Rey Mysterio Jr. and La Parca and Juventud Guerrera and the guys came into ECW, and I was wondering if there was something historical do you know any reason why happened?
That's a very good question. I've never thought about that myself. I just think that probably what happened in the 70s. What happened was one thing is the downfall of the Olympic Auditorium. So there wasn't a big need for Mexican Mexican wrestlers anymore. Plus Roy Shire, who was another guy that would bring in Mexicans, he wasn't doing too good around that time. And I think that might have had a lot to do with it. And, when I came in, I've always tried to help, the Mexican wrestlers out because besides being my friends, I owe that country everything. As you know, Dave, I've done everything there from commercials to plays to soap operas to records. I mean, I was the man over there. Sometimes I wonder why I even left, but, the thing is that when I came over, I wanted to show the American fans because to me, Love Machine, Art Barr, and Eddie Guerrero were going to show the United States how good the Mexican style of wrestling is, which, Chris Jericho has been in Mexico a lot of years. Ultimate Dragon's been in Mexico a lot of years. Chris Benoit. You see a lot of it now in the United States. I wanted them to see this exciting style, not this, this what I thought was very boring, methodical. Even though it looks choreographed, if you can do what Rey Mysterio has done, which is take a lot of the Juventud and a lot of those guys, take the spectacular spots from Mexican wrestling and put in some of the American logic and even some of the Japanese aggressiveness, it's an incredible mix. But I just think that some of the promotions like World Class, the Olympic Auditorium out of L.A., Roy Shaz, a lot of those who were using Mexican wrestlers weren't doing that good due to, Vince McMahon's expansion, and that's the reason why you didn't see a big influx. Do you think that makes logic?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it because one of the things, I guess I've just been around so long that it's kind of funny to me when you'll have something now where people go, the Mexicans can never draw, that kind of that stigma. The Mexicans can't draw in the United States, and I've unfortunately been around long enough to remember seeing, Mil Mascaras, like in Madison Square Garden, was like a huge star.
How about Pedro Morales? He ain't Mexican, but he's Puerto Rican. He's Latin. I mean, he was a huge draw.
Yeah, well, that's Puerto Ricans in New York, but I mean, like Mil Mascaras has sold out, Madison Square Garden with superstar Billy Graham and was probably in the 70s, one of the 3 or 4 biggest stars, baby faces in American wrestling. It was probably, Bruno Sammartino, Mil Mascaras, Dusty Rhodes, and Andre the Giant.
Now, you would know this, Dave. Does AAA still hold the record at the Sports Arena the time that we debuted our show?
I know you turned more people. I think that, there have been other sellouts, but you might have put more in the building. I mean, I would almost say for sure, because I remember the very first show, which is the one that I'm sure you're talking about.
Right.
There were a lot more people in that building than should have been, because I just remember every seat full and like 90% of the aisle space full, and like, so I don't think that there was ever like a WWF show in the sports arena, and they sold out several shows there as well that probably had as many people actually in the building.
So that just shows we can draw. I think Eric missed the boat because instead of trying to key into the Hispanic demographic, I mean, you got to remember, I'm Cuban, Puerto Rican, so, and then, I started out in Mexico. So those are the three biggest Hispanic populations in the United States, which right now is the biggest minority in the United States. And I had a good rapport with them, and we could have drawn them in, but, me and Eric just butted heads too many times, and I guess to show me a lesson, he never pushed me as a Latino star that I should have been. But, that's in the past. But, yeah, it's an untapped market. And, you're seeing it now in music. Look at Ricky Martin. There ain't nobody hotter than him. It ain't easy to sell out concerts anymore. He does it by himself. Ricky Martin, Jennifer Lopez, Christina Aguilera, in boxing, Oscar De La Hoya is the biggest, pay-per-view, guy out there. The fight between him and Trinidad was, incredible hoopla, incredible match. I can't wait for the rematch. So, the Hispanics, they do have, purchasing power.
Yeah, I think that's something also that hasn't been looked at in wrestling, is also that a lot of these, and you and I have actually talked about this, a lot of these magazines like People Magazine and some of the other ones, they're actually coming out with like basically Latin editions of the magazine for the United States market.
Right, and then you got to ask yourself, why would a thing like People Magazine, bother to even make a whole edition in Spanish if they didn't think there was any profit in it? And it's still successful because it's just a market that hasn't been tapped. It's like not long ago, BET, when it first started, the Black Entertainment Network, everybody, come on, a channel for brothers, or, whatever derogatory term they wanted to use. And now look at it, it's huge, because they're catering to their people.
Let's go to the lines. We've got Mike in New York. Mike, what's going on? You're here with Konnan.
Oh, hi, Konnan. I want to know, Konnan, I have a two-part question for you. I was wondering, what do you think of the powers that be in WCW? And two, with the current state of politics in WCW, and it's apparent that they're not pushing a man with your charisma anymore, would you consider going to the WWF in the near future, where I'm sure that Vince McMahon would know how to utilize your skills and get the most out of you?
Carlos, did you hear that?
I can't hear that. What did he say?
He basically he asked what your opinions were of the powers that be in WCW, and he said that it looks like that they're not pushing you to your fullest, and would you be interested in going to the WWF, where he thinks Vince McMahon would push you to your fullest? So that was basically the question.
Let me answer the first question, because I didn't understand the second one. You'll have to say it again, because I'm on a cell phone. But what do I think about the powers that be? Like I said before, when they first came to WCW, I told them, I go, I'm a huge fan of your work. I love what you've done in WWF, which I had. And, and I told them, here's me, Rey Mysterio, Billy Kidman, Eddie Guerrero, Juventud Guerrero as a shoot. We hang out everywhere together. Disco's another guy we hang out with, but, we couldn't see him fitting in. And, we'd like to do something along the lines of DX, just be the cool, hip baby faces who don't give a damn. Because that's basically how we are. And, they gave us like a push, and then now everybody's gotten hurt, and Tori's still renegotiating, and I don't even know what they're going to do with us. But they seem to be very smart. You got to remember, can you hear me, Dave?
I hear you perfectly.
Okay.
They can hear you perfectly.
You got to remember, these guys just moved into WCW. That's like moving into a new house. So you got to look for the nearest shopping center, the nearest tanning salon. You got to plug in your light. The electricity, the cable. They're still trying to find out who works, who doesn't. I think it's very smart of them to put a lot of people in the to commentate to see who has the ability to be a good orator. They're putting a lot of people in positions where they need to show and prove. And it's kind of funny because I think, and somebody told me this the other day, but it could have something to it. You're seeing a lot of these guys who before were making all this money and were never on TV, and now they're working them. Larry Zbyszko was a guy that always used to install a lot of the Mexican wrestling matches. You heard what Vince told him on TV. I almost think like he's getting back at a couple guys. Lex Luger, who's always been a prima donna, they threw him in the mud. I don't know if it's coincidental, but I almost think like he's getting back at a couple people that have kind of, run roughshod on WCW. But I think they're doing an excellent job. Come on, you gotta, it's Monday and Thursday. You're not always going to hit 1,000. And I think they're trying to find out who are going to be the money makers, who are going to be the mid-card guys, who's going to put up a tuss when they're made to do a job. So, and I think Vince has everybody's respect. I think people know he's not a guy you can play around with or fool around with because he ain't going to take too much shit. Now, what was the second part of the question?
Basically, would you be interested in going to work for the WWF and working for Vince McMahon?
Yeah, well, I'm 2 years away from that, but, obviously, if they don't do with me nothing now, and even Vince Russo said this on Friday, I was able to hear a little bit of the interview. When you get pigeonholed in a spot too long, it's kind of hard to get out of it, which was like a problem Louis Spicoli, God rest his soul, who's a good friend of mine, had. Art Barr, who's a good friend of mine, he had to come to Mexico to show that he was the best heel in the world, which he was at that time. So, if I'm in the same spot for 2 more years, I don't see any upward movement in WCW. And plus, they seem to have a problem making stars. I hope Vince and Ed can do it with me because I think, I have a lot of potential.
We were talking, you were just bringing up Art Barr, and I wanted to bring that up because I had just seen an article written, in fact, just a couple of days ago. It was on the 5th anniversary of the death of Art Barr, and I can remember that because it was like Thanksgiving weekend or maybe even Thanksgiving night where I was sitting at home and I got a phone call from Japan and then, a couple of other calls, and all of a sudden it was like, first we heard the rumor and then it turned out that it was true. And I know that for you that had a major, major effect on you in a lot of ways because you had just started a program where you had turned heel to team with Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero, and it pretty much you ended up turning babyface out of it, but also he was like, for the Americans, he was probably just about your closest friend down there, wasn't he?
Right. He was my best friend ever in this business. Eddie Guerrero was also my other best friend, and they both had tremendous tempers. They were always fighting. It was funny. I always wanted to challenge Eddie to a fight. Eddie always wanted to challenge Art, and we were always fighting. We were always threatening to kick each other's ass. And that's just the way we were on the road. Art Barr hated Mexico. He hated being away from his son. He was a total maniac on the road. I remember one time at an award show, Antonio Pena, our boss, actually told me if he continues, because in an award show he just got up in the middle of the award thing and started dancing on a table and stole somebody's trophy, and he just went berserk. And my boss kept saying, this guy keeps it up, I'm going to have to fire him. But he didn't understand. That was just how Art was. He loved attention. He loved to be the center of attention, and he turned out to be the greatest heel that I've ever seen. I learned a lot about him because I didn't know too much about, American psychology, working the camera, taking American-like bumps, and he showed me all of that, and he was just a great teacher, great friend, and not because he passed away, he was just the greatest. And you met him, Dave, because I know you went to a couple of our AAA shows, and you saw how zany he was. He hated you when you talked bad about him, and he loved you when you wrote good stuff about him,
Yeah,
and
like everybody.
He was just an intelligent, just motivated professional who still has a lasting impression on me.
Since when you came to the United States, adapting from being the one of the top guys in Mexico, coming to the United States where the Latino fans knew you, but they didn't portray you. They didn't really market you to them, but some of them knew you, and you were kind of pretty much unknown to the rest of the fans, starting with WCW, and you got an initial push. They gave you the U.S. title for about 6 months there, but what was the hardest part of your first 6 months to a year in WCW, where you were there, you were you were getting something, but at the same time you really weren't getting anywhere?
It's just hard because there's so much more politics here than over there. Over there, everybody's dying and they need money, so everybody's working. You have to, everybody works more together. And here it's more like it's a guaranteed contract, so guys don't care if they're hurt, guys don't care if they're on the road. They don't give a damn. They're going to get their money granted. And in Mexico, you see Rey Mysterio, he would have never gotten an operation in Mexico. He would have just worked injured. I worked injured. Everybody worked injured or you didn't get paid. There was a different work ethic. We didn't just go out there and just go through the motions. What was hard for me was, being in command. I was always a guy that, I always booked all the finishes. I always found new talent. As I brought in Jake and Yokozuna, Jake the Snake Roberts, and the Warlord, and a lot of guys that we used there. All the angles were basically mine and Pena's, and I was free to create. And I never held anybody back. Even Vampiro, who, as we've had we just have a huge dislike for each other. He asked Norman Smiley, he goes, please tell Konnan if I can, get into the promotion. I know he don't like me. And I just said, no, I don't like you, but you can make money for me, so come on over. And I made him sign a contract that if he missed any shows, he'd have to pay the promoter for all the publicity costs, because Vamp was the type of guy that would hold people up at the last minute or wouldn't show up or would get into a fight with a fan or didn't want to do the job. But he drew people, and that's all I cared about. And here it's, if they like you, if the top guys like you, or you do what they want you to do, then you're in. If not, you're out, which is basically what happened to me when I was close to some of the top guys. To me, it was just hard because there's a lot of subtle racism. It isn't written on the wall, but you can see it. And it was just hard to be D-man and then just kind of get treated like shit,
Let's go to John in New York. John, what's going on?
Hey, Dave, what's going on? How's it going, Carlos?
Hey, how's it going, man?
I just want to make a quick comment. Being a guy who pretty much was main eventing there for a while with the NWO Red and getting a lot of push from being in the NWO, did you ever have maybe like a moral issue when you saw how a lot of the luchadors who were brought in, who came in from Mexico, were kind of being, almost a buffoon role on television, and you're getting to rub elbows with the top guys in the company? Did you ever have any kind of moral question that made you feel almost a little guilty?
No, because what I was trying to do is I was trying to get power so I could rub it off on them, you know what I'm saying? And that was what I was trying to do, and the only way that I could do it was being because the more juice you have, the more you can give out, you know what I'm saying? Hello?
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
And so, yeah, of course I hated how they treated them. I hated the way they took off their mask. I mean, Eric took off Rey Mysterio's mask just because he wanted to, no other reason. Yeah, he's a good little kid.
Whoa.
Part of our culture.
Konnan, I think we're losing you. Okay, and we've got Konnan back on the line. Konnan, how you doing?
Hey, yo, what's up? Yeah, I was on a cell phone on my car, and, a lot of mountainous ranges, so I'm back at home now, so we got clear reception now.
Okay, cool. We're going to go to the phones. We're going to go to Wes. Wes, what's going on?
Hey, guys, how's it going? My question for Carlos was if he felt that either one of the two big organizations would ever try to work again with one of the Mexican organizations. I know Eric Bischoff wanted to get up with EMLL a couple years ago, and it fell through, but I wonder what his thoughts were.
Well, I just think that one of the things that you could have done with Mexico is you can bring a lot of young guys like you're seeing right now in ECW. Super Crazy's getting over. We've seen how Juventude's gotten over, how Rey Mysterio, etc. You can get a lot of young guys that you can teach the American timing to, and you have future superstars who aren't going to cost you a lot of money because most Mexicans aren't into the contract passing, negotiating, and holding up and holding out and all that. And on top of that, you also had a farm system that you could send people to. Like right now, they have the guy that was the real big guy in the tall giant guy. What was he called, Dave? The guy
Giant Silva. Giant Silva.
Giant Silva. He's in Mexico, and he's actually become a big star. And, he's getting his seasoning in. They also got Kuragan or Kugarans or whatever his name is. He's over there, too, and he's been doing well. He's a terrible worker, but he's getting seasoning, which he wouldn't have gotten in WWF. I just think that one of the main problems with us is Eric didn't like me, and then he tried to use Sonny Ono to do it, and Sonny Ono doesn't understand, Mexican wrestling or even speak Spanish for that matter. And I think in the WWF what happened is they brought in the wrong guys. Paco Alonso, instead of thinking business, he brought in a lot of guys that have been loyal to him over the years who were kind of older, who couldn't do, Vince McMahon wanted to see the next Rey Mysterios and the next Juventudes and Aguilas, and this guy was sending him guys that were 30-plus years old who had been resting on their laurels in Mexico and didn't have much to offer. But if, they would have let me, well, you've seen some of the talent I brought. The last guy I brought in, Blitzkrieg, is a sensational athlete. But another thing that hampered the negotiations is SmackDown came in and Thunder came in, so they didn't want to allocate a lot of time to something that they weren't sure if it was going to, be profitable in the end. So I really don't know. I just think Vince or now Bill Bush has to have faith that it's going to be profitable in the long run, which it can be. Does that answer your question?
Anything else?
Oh, yeah, and also if you could comment on your feelings on Antonio Pena. Obviously, you guys don't really like each other, but could you ever work for him again, or is that just...
It's not that we don't like each other, it's just that, I was definitely... Mexican wrestling was revolutionized because of me and him. The ideas that we brought in, we made it more modern, more hip, more risque. We brought in a lot of these gimmick matches that have never been seen. They're like lumberjack matches, strap matches, chain matches, cage matches, all that had never been seen over there. Plus, when I was in ECW, I was heavily influenced by their style, so I brought a lot of the ECW style to AAA. What had happened is just that it came a point where Pena, first of all, Pena's the most creative, most hardworking individual I've ever been around. I mean, he just, lives wrestling 24/7. He was my mentor, my teacher. What happened at the end is just that, I was basically booking a lot of stuff, coming up with a lot of ideas, and I kind of felt like Vince Russo in that I wasn't getting my props, and he had some personal problems that he was attending to, and he wasn't taking care of business, and I didn't like the way he was running business, and there were a couple moral issues that came into play. And Promo Azteca told me that they were going to have a new television new channel, and that if I would come over and I could do my own wrestling show. But as we were trying to get that going, Eric Bischoff pulled me out of Mexico and said I couldn't work there anymore. But it kind of got ugly at the beginning because I don't know if you know about this. There was a lot of mudslinging between me and him in the press and on TV. But I'll always admire him, and he did a lot for me.
Thanks for your comments, Konnan.
All right.
Okay, thanks a bunch, Wes. That brings up 1992-ish, if I got the year right. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. You were wrestling for EMLL. What exactly happened? I mean, you had actually told me long before this thing ever happened what was going to happen, and it actually happened exactly like you said, where Antonio Pena was the booker for EMLL. EMLL was probably at its all-time peak of popularity. You were, I remember talking to different people like yourself and others. I mean, there were guys that were, you guys were probably working 10 shows a week and making, and getting good money.
Yeah.
And then, Pena went out on his own, and AAA at the very beginning, really caught fire, and within a couple of years, AAA was, to me, for a while there, was the most entertaining wrestling promotion in the world. But when did Pena come to you and say, I'm going, and when did you make your decision you were going to go with him? And then when he started, you were responsible for a lot of the guys coming in because nobody had ever heard of Psychosis. I remember watching the AAA TV when it was on Galavision and seeing this guy Psychosis, okay, and I'd never heard of him, and people were going, oh, it must be heavy metal because nobody's that size that's that good in Mexico. And I go, no, it can't be because they're wrestling each other, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then Rey Mysterio came in and some of the other guys. But anyway, how did Pena approach you, and what was the feeling in Mexico and during that period among like the veterans and the younger guys as far as like a promotion going? Because EMLL was like WWF and they hadn't been challenged.
Yeah.
I guess there was UWA. What was the political situation like anyway in 92?
The hugest superstars at that time, Konnan, Vampiro, Octagon, Perro Aguayo, the Dynamite Brothers, etc. Rey Mysterio and Psychosis weren't even around yet. I brought them from Tijuana when we first started AAA. What had happened was we actually were running, believe this or not, we were actually running close to 90 shows every 2 weeks. That's how deep our talent roster was. I was literally, and I'm not kidding, I was literally doing 3 shows a day, like 5 days a week, and then the next 2 days I'd do 2 shows, and it was almost like a movie star. You were just being rushed place to place in these luxury cars, and you would get there and there were people screaming outside. Well, there was a lot of money being generated. But the guy that was doing all the work, which sounds kind of Vincent Russo-ish again, was Antonio Pena. He was the one doing all the work. He was the one getting, all the magazines to focus on wrestling. He was the one that had wrote a script for a movie on wrestling. He was the one doing everything. He was the one doing the angles, and he had like his own particular wrestlers that he felt were the future of wrestling. And as you know, EMLL's always been very traditional, so the veteran guys didn't want us to become stars. And there was just a huge movement to block us. And Pena just decided one day, hey, look, there's a lot of money to be made here. All you guys follow me, and we'll make money for ourselves. So I was one of the first guys that quit, then Perro and all those guys. And then, of course, I started to bring in, Eddie and Love Machine and Rey Mysterio and Psychosis and all those guys. But basically it was just a thing that a lot of money was being made, and we weren't, and it was disproportionate. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Now, what are your feelings personally and professionally regarding Perro Aguayo? Because you had You and him were like the two big baby faces during the heyday of AAA, and you feuded with each other before. I mean, you had a really big like hair match with Perro Aguayo before in EMLL before you ever went to AAA.
Yeah, he took my mask off. I was the first one ever to use a ref bump for a finish of a match in Mexican history, which shows you how backwards and how, just how old-fashioned Mexico was. This was like in 1991. A ref had never been used for a finish, and I used Grant Davies, God rest his soul, for a finish. And then they took my mask off, which I made a real big scene out of it. You might remember a day where I actually had a little kid who I told everybody was my brother take off my mask, and he was crying and I was crying. And this was seen all over Mexico. I mean, at that time, wrestling was on at Sunday at 12 o'clock noon. And every Mexican home got that channel. It wasn't cable. It was like watching CBS, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So overnight, everybody knew who I was. But basically, what was the question?
Oh, it's just personally, professionally, your feelings on Perro Aguayo.
Oh, Perro Aguayo. Well, he took off my mask, and then I told him, look, you can have my mask, but I want your hair, because only like 4 guys had ever taken his hair. Rene Guajardo, El Santo, like 3 or 4 guys in El Solitario, and they were all like super, super legends. And we did a hair versus hair match, and I won. And he's probably one of the most professional guys I've ever known. He'll work with a broken hand. He'll work with a cold. I mean, he's given to this sport like a Terry Funk. You know what I'm saying? I would consider him like a Terry Funk. He doesn't care. He keeps fighting. The people absolutely adore him, and he's a gentleman. And he helped make me, and I helped extend his career.
We talked about, like in the early 90s, and you brought a lot of those new guys in. I don't know how much time you've had to watch Mexican wrestling of late working with WCW, but have you seen guys in Mexico, on EMLL TV or AAA TV where you look at them and just go, I wish we could get these guys into the United States, or I wish, people would recognize them because they could be, like maybe what Psicosis and Rey Mysterio.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Every time you turn around, there's a guy raising the bar in Mexico. There are guys right now, believe it or not, I mean, more spectacular than the Hardy Boys, more spectacular than Juventud, definitely more spectacular than Ray, because Ray's had to tone down his style right now, They even have one of them, Blitzkrieg, which they don't do anything with. That guy's phenomenal. I mean, if you compare Ray, Juvi, Parka, Psycho, all those guys, at the 1 year mark, and you compare them with Blitzkrieg is actually more spectacular than them. Another guy who's very spectacular, who I knew I couldn't get into WCW because we had too many people, so I sent them to WWF with Victor Quiñones as Mr. Aguila. That guy's incredible. And they have what happens is a lot of these guys, like Mr. Aguila, he's spectacular, but he loses a lot in the transition. Like his punches look really bad, his kicks look really bad, and that's what's probably hurt him in WWF. But yeah, there's a lot of untapped talent. One guy who I kept telling Paulie Dangerously about, and he finally picked him up, and now he likes him. Is Super Crazy.
Yeah, he's done phenomenal there, I think.
Yeah, and I think Calo just went in there now, who's one of the hardest working guys in the business, and he should do good. And Mosco's another guy that's great that I've been trying to sell Paulie on. So, there's a lot of talent in Mexico.
Let's go. We've got a couple of emails in here I want to get to. This is from Vader, I guess. He goes, what does Konnan think of Vampiro? Actually, we've talked about that a little bit, but you and Vampiro probably have known each other for, probably 9-10 years, probably from the day he showed up almost in Mexico. Is that right?
The day that he showed up, I was kind of like, I was told to take him under my wing, and I actually introduced him to my girlfriend's cousin, who was his first girlfriend in Mexico. When he first came in, he was like a cool, shy guy. And then, the fame came to him real quick, like it does to all of us, and you get the big head. We started to have heat because, first of all, they offered him a soap opera, and he didn't want to do it because they didn't want to pay him enough, and they didn't want him to speak in it. They wanted him to be like a deaf mute, and he wanted to speak. And I remember telling him, what are you going to speak? You can't even speak Spanish. But, he was in his diva mode, and he didn't take the part, so they offered it to me. So he went, and when it became successful, of course, he went around telling everybody I took the part from him. And then, we got into like 1 or 2 altercations, and I've tried to make up with him because I don't like to be vindictive. I try to think that people can change, that people can be good. I try to find the best in people. And, you know, even now when he's been hanging around with this Jerry Only guy, because he tried to get me fired out of Promo Azteca with his little butt buddy Bob Barnett, who calls your show all the time. But anyways, they tried to get me fired from Promo Azteca. And basically he's been hanging around with this guy from the Misfits, Jerry Only, who's a guy that wears, like, the dark circles around his eyes, who's a really cool guy. And I even told him, I go, I hope some of this guy's niceness rubs off on you, but you can't change the spots on a leopard. He's still a jackass.
Okay. Let's go to David in Arizona. David, what do you guys say?
You guys had talked about Hogan when you were with Raven.
Right.
I'm not sure if you're allowed to comment on this. Maybe Dave could if you can't. Who are some of the guys that Hogan did hold back? I heard he held Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff back as one. That's why he wasn't on WrestleMania 3. You know anything about that?
No, I know nothing about that.
I wouldn't know about that. I mean, to me, WrestleMania 3 couldn't have been bigger than it was with Hogan and Andre. I mean, and Hogan and Orndorff did phenomenal house show business in '96, but and at its peak too, was one of the best house show runs the WWE ever had. But I mean, they still wouldn't have done the money that Hogan did with Andre the Giant.
Yeah, but Orndorff wasn't even on that card. I heard that was because Hogan had his request that had Orndorff changed to face heel. Orndorff
got burned out with a lot of the turns, but Orndorff, by the point, I don't remember the chronology, but Orndorff was really plagued by injuries for a while there too.
Let me say something, Dave, and this is a blanket statement, and you know this. And I have never fallen under this, and if I have, Dave, I want you to say it on public internet or whatever this is called, and call me a liar. But I was never the top star that was so insecure that I had to hold everybody back. But if you look in history, in Mexico and the United States, I don't know about Japan because I don't know their history that well, most guys, when they're on top and they're insecure, they'll try to hold people back.
Do you think it was a mistake to allow Kevin Nash to book?
Yes.
This past summer, Konnan?
Yes.
Yeah, he said yes. I don't think he wants to go into detail on that, but he said yes.
All right, that's it.
Go ahead,
questions
Dave.
I have.
That's it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't be vindictive and be a booker. That'll answer that one.
Yeah, I noticed Kevin Nash was putting over guys like Rey Mysterio Jr. and Goldberg, but of course when the title's on the line, Kevin Nash wins. I thought that was kind of interesting during the booking.
Most bookers are self-serving, so you can't blame them for doing what every other booker has done, but you can't hold other guys back because you don't like them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when Kevin Nash was booker, I think a lot of it was, there was a lot of transparency into, like when he put over Rey Mysterio, it was so obvious to me that it was just like, here, look everybody, I'm going to put, it's like, I'm going to put this guy over as an example to everyone, but he really didn't because everyone, everyone knew that if
Luke or Sting or any of those other guys, because he knew nobody would buy the Rey Mysterio thing.
Right, nobody would take it seriously. It wouldn't hurt him.
Kevin Nash squashed Rey on the uncensored pay-per-view.
Yeah, that's right. And then they ended up taking his mask off as well. I'll tell you, one of the things with the WCW, in fact, when your phone died, you were in the midst of talking about that. One of the things with Juventud Guerrera and later Rey Mysterio Jr. or actually it was, is with the masks and everything, they could have made that mean something. And I'm not even saying, I think with Juventud Guerrera it was not even a mistake to take the mask from him. But I think that they, they rushed things.
Right.
You know what I mean? Rather than let it mean something. So then, okay, he lost his mask, but what did it really accomplish in the long run? And I think with Ray, it was the same thing.
Every time they see somebody in their mask who's good looking, they always say, "Why are you wearing a mask? You're too good looking." And the thing is, that's just part of the aura. You know what I'm saying? And I don't even know why you couldn't do a thing where you know what he looks like without the mask, right? But when he gets into the ring, he puts on the mask and he almost does a metamorphosis of sorts. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you have to leave it off in the United States? But
well, what were the feelings as far as those guys? Were they when the time came for them to lose their mask? They
were totally pissed. They were totally pissed, but they didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to lose their jobs. Plus, they got a lot of heat in Mexico, like sellouts. Why do you guys do that? Why do you let them do that to you? How can you lose your mask like that? Because in Mexico, it's just, unless you live there, the United States just, we are in the United States and we have to do as they do, but you should try to respect some. Why didn't they tell Jushin Liger to take his mask off?
Yeah.
Maybe because he wasn't under contract. But what I'm trying to get at is you should try to respect some customs and traditions. I mean, when you go to Japan, you don't make fun of them because they take off their shoes or walk into a room or the way they use the bathroom or whatever. You just adapt and
Hello, is everyone there?
Hello?
Keep going, everything's fine. Okay, I'm sorry.
But in Mexico, they got a lot of heat because, there's usually a big buildup, as you know. And if they would have, and even Chris Jericho didn't like the way it was done because he was brought up in Mexico. So it was done wrong, and it was done for all the wrong reasons.
But real quick also, as far as like some of the stars, are there any stars like on EMLL right now that are down there as far as that you're kind of like, that you've seen on TV that are really good high flyers, some of the younger guys that maybe no one in this country would know or would barely know?
Probably a guy that just went over to AAA. His name is Oriental. He's the brother of the Moreno sisters. He's off the hook. Super Calos brothers, Motocross and Alan Stone. Mano Negra Jr. Who's another guy? They have so many guys underneath right now that are doing so many incredible things. It's just like, those are probably the guys that come out the most right now. Oh, there's a guy in AAA that's incredible. His name's Pathfinder.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the guys that stick out. I'm not going to try to bring anybody here anymore until they do something with the guys they have now, or unless they ask me to,
We've got the poll, final results in on the poll. What did you think about last night's wrestling? 23% saw both shows and thought that Nitro was the better show of the two. 40% saw both shows and thought Raw was the better of the two, which means 63% of the people watched 5 hours of wrestling last night, which so did I, as a matter of fact. 21% did not watch Nitro, 6% did not watch Raw, and 10% did not watch either Nitro or Raw. So anyway, that's the results of the thing. We've got one question. We're going to go to the calls. In fact, we've got Bob Barnett on the phone, so we're going to go to him just right after this question. This is from Sanchez, who wants to know, what did you think of the Piñata match?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
I thought it was funny. All these people, like when they see the Taco Bell dog and they get up in arms in the Piñata, we make fun of other races. If you can't make fun of your own, then, you need to get a life. It was funny.
Okay, let's go to Bob Barnett. Bob, what's up?
Hi guys. I had to call in because Carlos had to say, butt buddy Vampiro, and I only got about 3
like you do is lick his ass, bro.
I just wanted to know, Vamp sort of thought that you guys were starting to cool off on each other. When are you ever going to get to the time when you can just lay off it?
You and Vamp can both kiss my ass. That's what I have to say about that. The motherfuckers going around the locker room trying to say I got heat for being on this internet show and that I was going to be on it in Tuesday and I was going to get more heat. He sounds like a little bitch going around gossiping, and you're usually the guy that gives him most of this gossip. So fuck both of you.
Well, good, Carlos. I'm glad that you show your stripes again. Thanks, Dave. I'll talk to you.
Say something really funny so everybody thinks you're a charming guy. Get the hell off the line.
Whoa.
Good old Carlos. Bye.
Yeah, good old Bobby. Bye.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, that was definitely different. We got Scott in California. Okay, let's go to Scott. Scott, what's up?
Hi there. First, I just want to say real quick, my brother and I both feel like you're without peer in this business. He's been getting the newsletter since like '83, so he knows what he's talking about. Anyway, I just had 2 quick questions. One, at Havoc, the spot through the table, you look like you legit hurt your shoulder on that, Carlos?
No.
Well,
no, I didn't.
You're a great actor if not, because you look like you really, I don't know, you were kind of holding your shoulder after that?
Yeah, well, you just gotta, that's just basically how, when I went to when I took acting lessons in Mexico, that's basically what they say, just pretend that it really happened to you. So I just pretend that, the guy landed on me, that my shoulder was separated. That's all it really is. It's just acting.
Wow. I've been watching since like '79, and you had me completely fooled. I thought it was a hard way table shot.
No, thank you.
At any rate, the other question I had real quick, now I don't pay too much attention to what I read on the internet, because I was a fan, die hard, like long before, the whole net thing. And, the internet's great because it brings a lot more attention to the industry, and it's a great tool and all. But a lot of the writers, I don't believe a lot of what they say, but I do read frequently that there's heat between Mexican workers and Japanese workers. Any truth to that?
No heat whatsoever.
Yeah.
Actually,
I pretty much figured it was bullshit.
Yeah, they both respect each other's. They both respect each other's work ethic, and more Japanese wrestle in Mexico than do in the United States. So there's a pretty good camaraderie there.
There's actually a long history of Japanese guys that have gone to Mexico and have been able to be like main eventers. I think just not Ultimo Dragon comes to mind right away, but I mean all of them, Jushin Liger, Inoki, Fujinami, they all Choshu all wrestled in Mexico, at one point or another. Sayama was like a legend in Mexico. That's right.
Right.
Yeah. We got Jeff in San Jose. Jeff, what's going on?
Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, Konnan, I remember seeing you in San Jose, I guess in '93 for a AAA.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to see Art Barr wrestle live.
Right.
And Dave, you were there. I think there were like 5,000 people there.
Yeah, there were two shows that I remember in San Jose that both did close to, one of them did, they both were right at 5,000 people where, when AAA first came into San Jose, like it'd be the same weekend as Los Angeles.
Right, and the advertising was like all screwed up. It was like major walk-up.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I remember about the first one, okay, the second one, once you've been to one show where there's 5,000 people, you're not surprised. The first one, which was the night before the LA show that did like the 17,000, 18,000 people. They had a show at the, at Sioux Rec Arena, right? San Jose State. And, so I think it was a Friday night, maybe it was a Saturday night, I don't remember offhand, but I just remember like, I was expecting that there would be like, 500 people at the building. And I had seen no advertising because even though San Jose is a very high Mexican population, there's basically a split in that the Americans have no idea what goes on in the Mexican culture and vice versa. And so I got to this building and there was like a huge line, to get in, and I get in there and the place is almost packed and the heat for that first show was unbelievable. And I felt like I was going like, 10 minutes down the road from my house and I was in like another world. And it was just like, my God, and this was my feeling also on the first couple of times the AAA came to the Sports Arena, especially the very first show, okay? I was sitting there in fact, Mike Tenay was there and there were some other people, and I was going like everyone, Vince McMahon, Bischoff, everyone who was running a wrestling company, I felt needed to be at that show because it would just open their eyes, because that first Sports Arena show is still probably, from a fan enthusiasm standpoint, I would say the greatest show I've ever seen, but the greatest heat on a wrestling show I've ever seen live.
Right. Do you think the Lucha Libre can ever be successful again in California, or is it just like a one-time thing?
Well, like at that point in time, I think the thing that made it so strong was the fact that Galavision had 7 hours a week of television, and it was all AAA. And, go ahead.
If WCW, WWF took the time to make their own Hispanic, like right now in Telemundo, all they do is they show matches from Nitro and they just do voice dubs, in Spanish. But if they let us, what we were going to do before, if they let us do a show for the Hispanic market like California, Texas, New York, Florida, etc., where the main Hispanic pockets are, plus a lot of Anglos like it too. It's exciting wrestling. If they would let us do a show catered just for them, we could make California big, hot territory in Texas and a lot of those places. Wouldn't you agree, Dave?
I think it's all a matter of television exposure and it's a matter of television exposure. You know how it is now, especially if you have the exposure and people are presented in a way that makes them look like stars, they become stars. I mean, there's a lot of guys who really are not necessarily that talented in wrestling, but if they're in there at a time when wrestling's hot and the production's really good, they become stars. And it's all in the presentation and the production. And now, I mean, I think so much depends on the look of the show. I think that like fans see a real flashy looking show and guys with great spectacular ring entrances, and then they'll go out and perform spectacular matches, they will get over. I think that it's just, but you've got to have the whole thing. It can't be dingy looking anymore. I mean, that's one difference. But with Pena and AAA, one of the things about that is they had unbelievably good ring entrances. I mean, it's like, it wasn't just the good wrestling, and it wasn't like there were no storylines. I mean, some of those angles, like when, what was it, the one where Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr formed the tag team when Eddie Guerrero, they took Blue Panther's mask off or something?
Right.
I just remember that those angles were like, they were simple, but they were like incredible and they worked.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you both.
All right.
Okay, thanks a bunch, Jeff. Okay, as far as like, we go back to that era and everything like that with the AAA and everything, are there any angles that like stand out in your mind, like, maybe you were in the middle of them, or maybe, just another one that just popped into my head was, it was again with Art Barr. When Art Barr wrestled Blue Panther, it wasn't the first one they wrestled, but it was the second one they wrestled, so it would have been the one where Art Barr lost his hair. Art Barr went in as the baby face, Blue Panther was the heel, and Art Barr, like, in the finish of that match, turned himself such total heel. I mean, it was like, that was one of the greatest performances, you know. I just remember seeing, like, that the facials and the little things he did.
Yeah.
Because really, you know, he, as a babyface, he was a star there, but as a heel, he was a megastar.
Yeah, it was hilarious because him and, believe it or not, DDP, they were actually outshining Jake the Snake Roberts, you know. And Jake was giving us so much trouble. I just told Pena, well, let's get DDP. He ain't going to cost us as much money. But then DDP signed with WCW. But, you know, some of the greatest angles were mostly what I did with Pena, and this was my idea. I said, let's use, because I remember this from MTV when they did the whole thing with Cyndi Lauper, and I remember the thing with Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman. What I would do is, since I was a crossover celebrity in Mexico, is I would get on the top-rated talk shows, and we would shoot angles right there. So almost like they tried to do now with Dennis Rodman on The Tonight Show and what they were doing there. And it worked. You know, we gained new audiences. We actually had matches. We actually put a ring in a studio, and we had like a full match with dives and blood and everything, and people were like, what in the hell is going on here? And then, so our best angles were there. You know, I used to like to do a lot of stuff like, one time we had the clowns sitting in the first row, you know, the guys that are dressed up as the clowns, and they attacked the ring, and it was Art Barr, Eddie Guerrero, and Black Cat from New Japan. I used to like to do a lot of stuff like that. Like one time they were beating up on Rey Mysterio, and I came out dressed up as the Killer, which is like a black robe with black gloves and a black mask. And they gave me a kendo stick, and I started to beat up all the heels, and I took off the mask, and it was me. I like to do a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, kind of like what DDP did with the La Parka thing not that long ago.
Or like what they did with Goldberg when he was a Riot Cop guy, which they'd already done with Austin.
Right, yeah, which is the same thing with Austin. Now, when you were growing up in Florida, were you a wrestling fan?
Yeah, huge wrestling fan till maybe the age of 9, and then I stopped looking at it. Jack Briscoe, Jerry Briscoe, Dusty Rhodes, those superstar Billy Graham, those were the guys I liked. And I actually used to take a bus, I'll never forget this. I used to take a bus to the Miami Beach Convention Center, and it took 2 buses to get over there, and I had to get a ride back, usually from another fan, because it was too late to get the bus back. Anytime Abdullah the Butcher or the Sheik were there, because I was so mesmerized by the fork and the blood and the fire and all that.
Now, when you first started in Mexico and everything, was there any one thing or any one person who was like at first glance where you had seen only American wrestling where you just go, oh my God, like that they kind of just like opened your eyes? I don't know if it was may have been Super Astro or somebody like that.
When I was in Mexico?
Yeah, like someone who you saw like early in your career where it was just like, oh my God, I didn't think like a human being could do this or something.
Negro Casas.
Yeah.
Which Chris Jericho actually told me this. He said he's the greatest wrestler I've ever seen in the ring because he could make you laugh, cry. Art Barr was like that too. Art Barr wasn't the most spectacular, but he just could make you laugh, cry, get mad, get happy, and those are the things I worked on, because you're almost like a conductor up there, conducting a symphony. And when I first saw Rey Mysterio, I was like, what is this? There was another guy from Tijuana called Thunderbird, who's always hurt, who did stuff that you'll never be able to see because he's so hurt. There's so many Mexican wrestlers that have been hurt on those hard mats and those hard floors, and there's no medical attention, and it's just really ridiculous how they're treated over there.
I got one before we got to go because we're pretty much wrapping up on time. I want to know what your thoughts are since you've known the guy personally. He's probably in his day was the biggest star in Mexican wrestling. He's still around now, and very controversial figure. I don't know if you saw Mick Foley's book, but Mick Foley ripped on this guy pretty heavily, and that's Mil Mascaras.
Yeah, well, he's gotten heat with everybody because he's a super prima donna. I'm going to tell you a story which I cannot believe. When I was a little kid, I actually used to make masks out of like bed sheets and try to imitate Mil Mascaras because he was Latin, so to me he was a hero, and I thought his masks were cool plus he had a nice physique. And when I met him, he was such a dick. I mean, he didn't want to do nothing, and he was a prima donna, and he kept telling me how he beat up all these guys in Germany and how he screwed all these stewardesses in Sweden, and I mean, he just went on and on and on. And it was really fun because when I started making it up in Mexico, I actually bought a house next to his. And I was like, wow, I finally made it. I'm living by Mil Mascaras, and I actually finally met his wife. She's like a Japanese girl, and He's very cultured, very intelligent, very well read. I mean, he's like maybe one of the smartest humans I've ever met in my life. I mean, he knows anything about everything, you know, and everything about anything. But he's just hard to deal with, just a prima donna and just very hard to deal with.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're pretty much out of time right now. Konnan, thanks very much for being here. We'll be talking to you soon.